Great, so I'm going to make a start. So thanks everyone for coming to this session. I appreciate there's lots of other sessions at the same time. They're all great ones, so thank you for coming to this one. My name is Fiona Hutton. I'm the head of publishing at eLife. So this session is going to focus on communities and organizations that are working on decentralization of peer review. So we're going to see some examples from eLife, MetaROR, Centre of Open Science, with an overview by Katie on what PRC is and why we're doing PRC. And we're also going to look at the diversification and training of peer reviewers from different communities, and that's going to be led by PREreview and HHMI. And we're also going to talk a little bit, and this will probably come out in the question and answer session, about how these organizations work together. You know, we've got a really great community here. We share and we support one another in what we're doing, and we learn from each other. So the orders of the speakers is shown up here. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. All questions and discussions will be at the end of the session. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, I am Katie Corker from ASAPbio, and my task is to introduce the publish-review-curate model of publishing. So we have some excellent examples of the model that you're going to hear from later in the session. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of sort of what the model is, just so everyone has the necessary background information to sort of help us dive into the details a little bit more next. So what is the difference between traditional publishing and the publish-review-curate model? Publish-review-curate is a model of scientific communication that breaks down the process of publishing into distinct parts. In the publish stage, a research output, an article, a data set, or study registration is made public by a researcher. And in the review stage, reviewers transparently evaluate the research artifact and provide feedback. And in the curate stage, the research outputs are compiled into collections, and they may have summary judgments or evaluations applied to them. So it's a model that supports decentralization by design, with different services executing different parts of the scholarly communication process. And that's in contrast to the traditional publishing system, where review and selection occurs before publication. It's led by a publisher in the sense that the author, chooses which journal to submit to, but then their control of the process stops there. It's often, but not always, a slow, closed, and expensive process. So it's doesn't leverage the sort of decentralization that the publish-review-curate model has. So publish-review-curate, by contrast, publish first, then you review. It's researcher-led in that the researcher is choosing when, where to publish their own output. It's decentralized, has this sort of network of actors. It's fast, it's open, and it's maybe efficient in the sense that the reviews can be reused for other purposes besides the initially intended one. I want to emphasize that this model can be applied to any research output. So we focus a lot at ASAPbio on preprints, but it's not just an article or preprint forward type of model. The model can generalize to data, to code, and more. So imagining sort of the role of a data repository, whether they know it or not, they have a PRC type model in that the output is published, and then it could be reviewed or evaluated as necessary. It could be curated and augmented by curatorial services. So just say a little bit more about sort of defining each stage of the process. I'm going to go very quickly through this so I don't go over time. We define publish as sharing a research output via a preprint server or other open repository. This avoids duplication of effort, and it leverages the infrastructure that we have from open archives like institutional repositories, preprint servers, and so on. The published outputs are freely accessible and openly licensed. They need to have a unique identifier. They need to have rich metadata, be findable and indexed, and be preserved under a preservation policy. So the short way of saying this is that they need to be fair, but that's sort of like loaded, jargony term. And people don't always necessarily think about publishing articles, especially as being fair outputs, but they are. They need to be. Review then means that there are openly available evaluations of the strengths and weaknesses of a particular research output. Ideally, there are reviewer conflicts of interest declared and/or checked. So someone is checking whether or not there's sort of a degree of distance or independence between the party that's reviewing the output and the party that shared it. Reviewer identity can be disclosed and or verified, so you can have anonymous reviewing in this model, but ideally there's some kind of party that's checking that, again, there's a distance between the reviewer and the authors. Again, the reviews themselves become a scholarly output in and of themselves. They too are meant to be freely accessible and openly licensed, ideally with their own identifier, rich metadata, et cetera. They should also be fair outputs. But one additional piece is that they need to be linked by relational metadata to the output being reviewed. So because it's a decentralized system, you need to have outputs shared one place, reviews shared somewhere else, and you need a way to link them together. And so metadata is the way that we do that, we link the things together. Curate can mean a whole host of different things, so I'm just going to sort of wave hands and gloss over it. It's meant to encompass things such as building collections or lists, so very simple form of curation, quality evaluations, editorial commentary. The judgments can be binary, so you're in my collection or you're out of it. It can be ordinal, like I'm giving a sort of star rating or some kind of quality assessment, or they can be qualitative, just narrative summaries or evaluations of the artifacts. They can also involve metadata enrichment. So you can imagine something's been published and then an overlay journal of some kind is adding additional metadata to the output, or a data repository is adding metadata that adds value to the original artifact that's been shared. They can involve enhancements like badging or quality checking, certification, all things that are possible within the Curate model. I think the Curate part of this model is sort of the least well-developed. There are the least current examples of groups that are doing curation, but it's a really flexible space that once you have the publish and the review stages in place, you can do, there's lots you can do there. Research outputs can be curated multiple times, meaning you've got a published output of some kind. Multiple different parties can act on it, enrich metadata, review, add additional pieces, and so on. That's a feature, not a bug. So one key point that I want to emphasize is that implementations of the PRC model are diverse by design. So I'm talking about it as a model, but it's actually not one thing. It's many different things, a diversity of options. One thing to note is that the published outputs themselves might or might not eventually be reviewed and curated. So I'm not meaning to imply that a PRC model always implies a P and a C step. Some communities are fully behind the idea of preprint or publish, and then sort of that's the end of it. You just leave it as it is. There doesn't necessarily need to be an additional step. But the model is flexible enough that it can handle sort of diverse implementations. So it's this decentralization that really allows the interoperable innovation across all of these different services. So what I have here are logos of a variety of different preprint feedback initiatives. These feedback initiatives, some of which are producing something that I would call a review or would sort of meet our definition of an ideal review. Others are much more informal, things like comments and so on. All part of the scholarly record and all different ways of providing that evaluation and feedback. Some of them are really minimalist, some of them resemble more like a journal. We have different pieces of technology that perhaps some of the others will talk about a little bit more, like Core Notify and Society, that allow sort of the connectivity to emerge among these different systems. So if you're publishing on a preprint server or an institutional repository, you're getting a review from MetaROR or from PREreview or any of these other different communities. You need protocols like Core Notify, which allow the services to inform each other of key events. A review service can tell a preprint server that a review's been published, or vice versa. A preprint service can tell a review service that a preprint's available to be reviewed. Core Notify enables that kind of communication between these different pieces of the puzzle. And Society, which is run out of eLife, is another piece of technology that is enabling sort of the that curation step, the collection of all of these different outputs in one place. So giving an easy access to many different published and reviewed and curated artifacts all in one space. So you can kind of see the breadth of the activity going on inside. So I've stolen a figure here from Richard Sever. This was published a couple of years ago. And he kind of outlined sort of two possible systems. Sorry, the Zoom thing at the top is kind of blocking it, but it says it's the open ecosystem. I don't mess it up. The open ecosystem and the publisher silo are the words at the top there. So on the right-hand side, you have sort of the traditional system of publishing research outputs. You know, everything is sort of flowing through that one centralized channel that's really tied to specific journals. And, you know, authors are, of course, having the experience of submitting their paper and then it's going sort of moving on down the chain. So we as a community have a choice about whether or not we sort of stay in that publisher silo or we move to something that's a little bit more flexible, decentralized, and affords a whole menu of possibilities in terms of evaluating and curating research. So with that, I will say thank you very much. If you want to read more definitions and lots more about metadata, you can check out our preprint version of this talk, which is at the first link, and my slides are also at the second.
eLife is an organization that was set up by Max Planck Wellcome Trust and HHMI in order to change the way that research communication behaves. So they wanted to provide an example of how to do research communication differently for scientists and the community itself. So eLife was always a journal that, you know, it launched as an open access journal. It was a nice journal doing a nice community effort, but actually, what does eLife exist for? eLife exists to drive change. So in January 2023, we launched a new model of publication, which is what is referred to by Kate as a publish-review-curate model of publication. So this is a slide just outlining the eLife model. So authors submit, very much like any other journal. There's a decision to review by our editors. We have over 800 editors, and it's a consultative process in order to decide which articles are sent out to review. Then there's this peer review consultation, and we produce something called an eLife assessment, which is what we are referring to as the curate part of the model. The author is given a chance to respond to the reviews that are produced, and then a reviewed preprint is published. Now, the reviewed preprint contains the preprint, i.e. the manuscript, the eLife assessment, and public reviews. So this is published as an output in itself. It has a DOI, a CC BY license. It's indexed in places like Google Scholar, OpenAlex. It has rich metadata. Now, some authors choose to leave it as a reviewed preprint, but the authors are then given the choice. But authors are given the choice to either put their article under another round of revision, i.e. they might not like the assessment that they were given with the manuscript. They want to respond to some of the reviewer comments. They can undergo another revision, and the assessment is updated in response to those particular comments. It can be published as a version of record for indexing, i.e. at that point the authors choose to send their article for indexing. So it can be published and so it can be indexed in places like PubMed. PubMed require a version of record for the article. Or the authors can choose at that point to send it to another journal. Perhaps they didn't like the assessment they got. Perhaps they decided actually we're going to take it to a different journal and do a different process with that article. So part of this is about giving authors choice, but it's also creating a different kind of output, which we call the reviewed preprint. Since we launched in January 2023, we've had over 13,000 submissions. So this just is an example of that curation step, the eLife assessment. So we're looking at the significance of the findings and the strength of evidence. So the articles are marked against two different these two different charts. So the authors are given each of these or one of these terms in terms of their article. I'll show you what that looks like. So this is an example of the eLife assessments. You can see that there's one of the significance of finding terms and one of the strength of evidence terms are used on those eLife assessments. So what's the value of doing a process in this way rather than the standard journal accept, reject process? So it gives author control throughout the process. The author decides if what they want to do with their article. They're not subject to an accept, reject decision. At some point, they have no control over what that is and what that looks like. Obviously, with eLife, we're still doing a very robust peer review process that's open and transparent, and that transparency increases the scrutiny of what's happened to those articles to the benefit of the author. We have these compact eLife assessments instead of that accept, reject decision. And what does this do? That stops the regurgitation and re-review of the same article at different journals with the same problems. So what happens in the normal system is an article is sent to a journal, it gets rejected, it gets sent to another journal, it gets rejected. Eventually it finds a journal that the editors will accept that particular article, hopefully, for the author. We don't need to do that anymore. The articles are peer reviewed. It doesn't matter what those peer reviews look like. That is available and open to anybody that wants to read it on the eLife website as this reviewed preprint output. And what we find is actually articles that the editors term perhaps incomplete or insignificant. We find them in the other journals published later on, accepted by a different group of editors. The version of records is something that we produce at the end of the process. We've had to do that because it complies with certain funder mandates who require us to produce the version of record. But the author doesn't have to go through that endpoint. The author can decide actually a review preprint is enough for them and what they need out of that particular evaluation. And then, of course, what we're looking at is what an author is published in terms of the research, not where it's published. So it's not published in eLife and therefore it means this or that. It's published in eLife and you can see the exact assessment that the editors thought about the article. So that's a transparent process. So what do our authors think of this? We sent out a survey and they were asked to choose what they felt were benefits, the top 3 items. They felt that that there's greater transparency throughout the process, there's less effort wasted in rounds of revisions, and the fact that obviously we're publishing the reviewed preprint, which is a quick publication turnaround because we're reviewing the preprint. Leads to accelerated peer-reviewed publication of our article. So in comparison to our legacy model, we're seeing these articles with the public reviews and assessments published within around 95 days, whereas in our legacy model, this was around 269 days. So what do our authors think of this? We've had great feedback from many of our authors that take part in this process. They feel it benefits them as a scientist, benefits what they're trying to do in terms of the way that they publish. And so we've had a lot of different comments here, just a few. They're in control of the publication process. It's not just about accept rejection, it's actually looking about assessment of the research itself. Others feel it's smooth, fair, transparent. We're going around, obviously, talking to a lot of different organizations about what they would support. We're within a system that's a very strict system that doesn't actually really account or enable experimentation within the system because you've got to do this and that and etc. So we've talked to a lot of different funders that are that are looking to support review preprints as part of research assessment. We're talking to a lot of other organisations about how that can change for them and their particular organisation. So I'm going to leave it there and pass to André.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is André Brasil. As you can imagine, I am from Brazil originally, but I've been based in the Netherlands for quite some time now. I worked there as a researcher at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, WTS, from London University. And I share part of my time both with a UNESCO chair on diversity and inclusion in global science. So you see a little bit of that in my presentation, but also as a research fellow at RORI. And it's with that main hat that we come to this discussion today to talk about MetaROR. MetaROR is a PRC platform, a PRC initiative that is very close to the reality of this conference, Metascience, because we are a platform destined and designed to work with meta researchers and all the different disciplines that fall under that umbrella of research and research. So from philosophy of science, sociology of science, to research policy, science and technology studies, scientometrics, and so on. So the idea is to bring this community that's very diverse, that's very multidisciplinary, that's very interdisciplinary, to work together to create a new type of platform where we can share knowledge fast. And I think this is one of the things that's very common to every PRC initiative. And as I mentioned, this project is part of RORI. So in RORI, we have a few research projects, and many of them you have heard about this week. And among them, we have two very interconnected. That's the peer review project, where we're investigating a little bit more in-depth perceptions and realities of different dimensions of peer review and how these can be improved. And we have MetaROR, which is a kind of a hybrid thing, because at the same time, we are a service, we are a portal, we are an actual PRC initiative, but we are also a research project in the sense that we are investigating and experimenting with PRC to find better ways to conduct processes, and especially, we'll dedicate some time to that, how we can make this valuable for us as researchers, for the evaluators, for the institutions and the communities. As part of the peer review project, main objectives, we have one, the idea to develop a systematic understanding of the characteristics and goals of peer review across domains. So not only the journal perspective, but for example, grant, peer review, review applied to national evaluation systems and so on. And the second one is to identify opportunities to reshape peer review processes in order to improve the way different goals are realized. And that relates very much to what we are doing with MetaROR. So we are running the system, and as we go as editors, as reviewers, as participants, as authors in the system, then we are shaping to see what works best. Because what happens a lot is that we are all very much stuck in the traditional ways of peer review, because that's what we had to go through. That's what we used to do and still do as reviewers as well. And to break that box and to try something different, it's not always very easy. But with that comes meta research open review. So as I mentioned, the idea is to transform the way we review and share meta research. And in a platform like that, I won't get into the details of this workflow. This is on our website with all the descriptions and so on. But we have a flavor, and this is something that we noticed from the different PRC initiatives, that they try different things. So for example, at MetaROR, we are not concerned with the publishing part of it. Including, for example, the Open Science plan for the Netherlands states that by 2030, there's an expectation that publication and review are detached. They do not need to belong together. And this is something that we are doing a little bit. So you can publish your preprint whenever you like. So we know different communities have their preprint servers of preference or have institutional recommendations. So you can publish in FeedShare, SOC Archive, OSF, doesn't matter. And then you just request the review to MetaROR. And then we're going to conduct the whole review process within MetaROR, and we're going to have an editorial assessment. As it happens with eLife, we do not have an accept, reject perspective. We understand science is not good or bad. There are the 1,000 shades of gray in the middle, and every research has strengths and has weaknesses, and our role is to kind of bring those to evidence. And one of the things that happens as a consequence is that when we publish the result of a review process, and this is an actual article we have. So what you see is our focus is on the peer review. In this case, this article has an editorial assessment and 2 peer reviews. And we have the full text available if you want to immediately check that out as well. But the point is, each assessment, each review brings a perspective and gets their own DOI. So if you review to MetaROR, your review will have its own DOI, and it becomes part of the knowledge construction process. Because, for example, I just today got the reply of a review I wrote for a major journal, saying that the decision of the editors was to reject the paper. My review disappeared into oblivion because that's not going to see the light of day. It's going to die in a back room in a publisher. And that's what usually happens. And this is also a problem for early career researchers. Early career researchers have fear sometimes to share their work because they consume the work that's coming ready and polished from the different journals. And when they get that, and they see that their work is not yet at that level, they think, I'm not good enough. You are. Probably that has gone through several rounds of reviews, internal within the institution, with reviewers in the journal, sometimes being resubmitted to different journals. And then what you see is the process of knowledge creation that now becomes more transparent with open reviews. We have a case that's very interesting of one of the submissions of MetaROR that the reviewer we invited actually engaged a couple of his colleagues, and they got all the data of the submission, reran the analysis, and they showed that there were problems with the analysis. And that's all reported. It has a DOI, and the authors are reviewing their work, citing the review as part of the revision process. So that becomes more clear how knowledge is constructed. So this is something that we're trying to foster. And we also need to be very pragmatic. So we know peer review, open peer review and preprinting, it's something very beautiful, very interesting, academically interesting, but then it comes my UNESCO chair hat. Especially when you go to the global south, you need to publish in journals. Countries like South Africa get around 50% of researchers' salaries from publications. So if I publish a preprint, I don't get my salary. People need, in several circumstances, to publish in journals. So we have partners that we work with, and what it means to be a MetaROR partner is that, for example, a journal like Scientometrics, if you submit something to MetaROR and it's reviewed, and then you have a curation process and you say, okay, great, now I want to submit to Scientometrics. What Scientometrics will do is to use our reviews as part of their evaluation process, make things faster, make things more efficient, and allows a revised version of that original submission to be published as a journal article which is unfortunately for some, still a need in academia for promotion, hiring, grants and these kinds of things. So we're not here to replace the journals, but to work with them in partnership to better serve the research community. And that has been so successful, for example, that we are currently running a special issue of JDIS, one of our partner journals, the Journal of Data and Information Science. So they have a special issue on sustainable development goals. And they said, oh, André, why don't you run the whole issue through MetaROR? So all the submissions are preprints, they are being submitted to MetaROR, and we have an editorial team that's appointed by the journal, working as guest editors with us. And we're going through the review process of the articles that are being submitted until September 15th is the deadline. And by the end, the guest editors will select which of the submissions are at a point that they could integrate the journal. But every submission will be available and reviewed within MetaROR. So it's like, let's work together towards something interesting. But then, just to finish, there's one issue to touch that is something I mentioned about the academic beauty of these and the pragmatic needs. So the pragmatic needs, we see the need, for example, to publish journal articles, but more than that, how do we get these type of output recognized? Because we have been discussing this with funders. That's one of the benefits of working with RORIs, because we have half a dozen research institutes and 3 dozen funders working with us. And then we can just get to them and say, okay, how can we make this valuable to you? And some funders, especially European funders, have been focusing a lot on qualitative analysis of research outputs. So it means using portfolio approaches, opening the set of types of research outputs that can be valued in evaluation processes. And that's great. We love that is a movement, but it's not a global movement. Lots of people still look at the global north and say, we need to be like they are, so let's use impact factors and main databases and age indexes. And then try to tell them this is not what the rest of the world is doing, but they still believe that that's the way to go. So how do you get a reviewed preprint that could be as valuable as a published article to be recognized as such? And so we're working as part of our research project with the funders to find a way for that, because this is the conception that we have. This is the understanding of the evaluation that we have a path, a preferred path. This is how we want to perform evaluations. But then you hit a limitation on human resources. Evaluations are time consuming. We don't have enough people to do all the evaluations that we want. So we see, for example, the REF here in the UK costs £500 million to make. It's really demanding, and that indicates also the need for money to run these types of evaluations, and the need for time. You need time to review articles and outputs and projects and grants and everything. And when you face these challenges, what happens is that they are in the way of your objectives. So that's just to have a nice representation of the research system. So you can fund wherever you can, considering that your resources are limited as well. So you need to be pragmatic from a funder perspective, and I speak as a former funder. I was a funder for 15 years. What happens is that you need to find an alternative path, the pragmatic path. And this is where you balance what you can do with what you want to do. And we recognize that to get to a funder and say, no, recognize our preprints with the reviews that we do not stamp quality on them. So basically we're asking them, you have to do a qualitative analysis of everything. And imagine how impossible that is. So we're trying to investigate, following once again on eLife's footsteps, our big brother that has been supporting and working with us a lot. So It's really good to work with eLife. But eLife has this that was already presented, the significance of finance and the strength of evidence. So this is an actual review from eLife that goes from the significance from useful to landmark and the strength from inadequate to exceptional. So even though there's no accept, reject, there's kind of a signal that when you look at it, you may have an idea of, do I count this as a positive outcome or don't I? And what we're trying to do is to do something like this and thinking, for example, taking inspiration. I know rankings are not very welcome in this type of discussions, but I like the concept that you multi-rank had because it was not a ranking, it was a profile that would show the strengths and weaknesses without needing to rank everyone. And why not do something like that with preprints? With reviewed preprints, we can select a series of dimensions and evaluate something in a multidimensional perspective. And if I'm a funder and I need to decide if that research output will count points in my decision to distribute funding, I look at a profile like that, and I have a very quick, easy way to interpret the results, even though it's there, it's available, and we don't care with the whole accept, reject perspectives. So these are things that we are exploring in this next year of the MetaROR project, and hopefully at the next Metascience, we will have some experience results from these kinds of things. And of course, if you have any ideas, please reach out. We are trying to work as much as possible with the academic community. Come to review for MetaROR. Your reviews will get their own UIs, will become citable, will become a recognition of the efforts that you're making. And as I mentioned, all of us can be part of the knowledge creation process. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eileen Clancy. I'm the lead on the Lifecycle Journal project, which is a 3-year pilot project from the Center for Open Science. So just like MetaROR, both the journal and a project pilot in itself. And so it's a pilot on a new model of scholarly communication. And right now we're about midway through that 3-year process. So I've got my notes on one computer and slides and stuff. Hopefully I don't mess up where I'm advancing here. But the aims of the Lifecycle Journal are concepts that we've really been talking about throughout these 3 days of the conference. But we are looking towards shifting the existing reward system away from publication of research output as the ultimate reward. And instead, we want to move toward rewarding the practice of rigorous science itself. We want to try to treat all processes, outputs, and outcomes of research as meaningful scholarly contributions. So let's stop the paper from being the be-all and end-all of scholarly outputs. And we want to open up more of the research process for transparent evaluation and feedback. And then kind of while we're doing all of this, we understand that there's pressures on authors. And so we want to maintain the existing reward structure for authors. We don't want there to be perceived risk for a journal. So in order to achieve those aims, we've got a collection of features. Some of them you've heard a bit about, some of them are innovations that are in place at other places, some are a bit more novel. We're trying to kind of combine those into a new model of communication. So it is published before review. So we're the PR of the PRC model. We include transparent assessment across the research life cycle. So not just once the research is completed, but also in the planning stages. We use a decentralized review process that involves multiple reviews from a collection of human and machine-based evaluation service partners. And this actually forms a community of practice for the innovators and evaluators as well to provide a place to try, evaluate, and improve new methods of review. This is a dynamic publishing model that allows for versioning, updates, and revisions over time. And so we hope that authors choose to engage with all of those elements. And all of this then is meant to be a transparent and open process that ensures meaningful assessment and recognition. And then finally, it's diamond open access, so it's free to publish and free to read. Fiona already showed a much prettier version of this slide, so I'm not really going to go over it. Except to say that we do have a slight difference from what Fiona discussed for eLife, which is that we do not have a traditional academic editor role that's assessing whether submissions should be sent to evaluation or not. So they're assessed internally to make sure they meet eligibility requirements like scope and ethics. And other than that, they go out for evaluation. And so I will then just be focusing. Oops. Oh no. Here we go. I will just be focusing on this evaluation part. So to undergo evaluation, as I mentioned, we're using a decentralized review process. So instead of having individual peer reviewers that are invited by academic editors, life cycle journals evaluations are handled by various evaluation services that we've partnered with. Oh, good. And I wasn't sure if I was too late with adding MetaROR. MetaROR is one that we're actually just in the process of working with. So we'll be welcoming Metascience research as well. So the list here is actually a mix of human-based and machine-based evaluation services. And we're trying to make the journal as inclusive as possible in terms of discipline. So our scope will evolve slightly and is based on the capacity of our evaluation services. So basically, if we have an evaluation service partner who handles a specific discipline, then we'll consider that for the journal. So right now, that means that we'll consider empirical research in the fields of natural and life sciences, medicine, clinical science, social and behavioral sciences, and then some of the humanities. And so this is a dynamic list. It's an expanding list. If you want to see your service on this list, you can talk to me afterwards. But yeah, these are the groups that we're working with right now. So as I said, the eligibility of submissions for assessment by various partners is determined during our initial submission scans. And so currently we have two submission types, research plans and outcomes reports, which probably pretty obvious where those land, but the research plan is at the early stages before research has been conducted. So you can consider that akin to pre-registration. And then outcomes report is then once the research is being completed, reporting on the findings of that. That can be considered akin to more of a preprint. And so of our evaluation services, we have some that can consider research plans, some that can consider outcomes reports, and some that can consider both. So depending on where you submitted is determining which of the evaluation services might look at your work. And then that's also determined by scientific discipline as well. So for instance, the PCI community journals all have individual subject area disciplines that they're specifically interested in, where the UnJournal is specifically directed towards economics, where some of our evaluation partners like PREreview, which you're about to hear about, or Research Hub have a broad scope. So the other thing that determines what will be evaluated, which evaluation services will be evaluating a paper is what's submitted with the paper. We went through a lot of debate while sort of designing Life Cycle Journal, conceptually and philosophically about whether we should what should be required with submission. And we ultimately decided to move towards a policy of disclosure rather than requiring authors to submit work. So basically authors need to disclose whether or not registrations, code, data, and materials are available. If they are available, share those. And if they're not, then explain why not. And these various outputs that are shared with the submission can then determine the dimensionality of the evaluation that's happening with different services poking out different outputs. So if a researcher submits an outcomes report, and along with that, they submit a registration, code, data, and materials, they're gonna get a much greater breadth of evaluations than someone who omitted all of those aspects. So rather than requiring these components to be submitted, authors who share them are rewarded with a more robust evaluation process. Pardon me. So eligibility for assessment is determined by journal staff, and evaluation takes place during a defined window period. So basically the window closes either when all of the evaluations are received or when the deadline is passed, whichever comes first. And then completed evaluations are published alongside the submitted work and sent to the authors at the same time. So trying to keep it as live, as real time as possible. So we actually have 6 work that's published currently on Life Cycle Journal. That's various levels, various stages of the evaluation process. So this is an example of one where evaluation has been completed on the initial submission. And so you can see that published prominently right at the top of the work on the website is the evaluation table that highlights who has evaluated it, what they've evaluated, and then those logos are links out to the evaluations themselves. So engagement with Life Cycle Journal's editorial process is very much author-led. We do not issue, accept, or reject submit decisions. So authors can choose to respond and revise to evaluations and then resubmit. And, you know, just like a more traditional journal, whether that would go for additional review kind of depends on what the revisions were. But authors can, and so at that point, it's considered, as with eLife, would be considered a reviewed preprint. Authors could go and submit that elsewhere if that's what they chose to do. But also optionally, they could choose to declare their current version to be the version of record, in which case that would become like a published research article. And they would no longer be able to submit that elsewhere. So the entire process is open, transparent, and author-led. So that was a little abrupt. I wish I had, as this is a Metascience conference, I would love to share with you all the data about what we've learned from this. But as I said, we've published 6 papers so far, so we're a little bit early in that process. And as André said, we're looking forward to the next conference sharing much more robust learnings. But in the meantime, I do really want to make sure that I thank our evaluation service partners who are working with us. I've got our website up there at the bottom. And then also it's kind of hidden, but there's an email address down there as well. And Center for Open Science has a booth, so you can stop by that. And I think there's 2 placards about Life Cycle Journal there as well. So thank you.
Happy to be here with you today. So a bit of a change of pace in the next 2 talks. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about specifically training in peer review. I'm going to be talking a bit about the PREreview platform and how we incorporate training into what we provide to researchers that we work with. And then Anna is going to follow on my talk and talk more specifically about how they do training at HHMI. I should also mention here that I'm going to do a bit of scene setting from a kind of equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. So we embed this throughout all of our work at PREreview, and very much believe this is the importance of why we do this training. So this probably is not news to anyone in this room, but peer review is inequitable and unsustainable. So the pool of reviewers is often very small, it's insufficient for the number of review requests, and the situation's only getting worse for the amount of papers that are published every year. The composition of the review pool is homogeneous in many dimensions. So many reviewers, are male, mid to late career researchers who are selected subjectively by journal editors as experts within their field. And yet most have never received any formal training in conducting peer review. And the data on the diversity of peer reviewers is quite scarce. So this is a study by Murray and al. From 2019, and they did a study of gatekeepers, so senior editors, reviewing editors, and peer reviewers at eLife within 2012-2017. About 7,000 of that 8,000 were peer reviewers. And the authors reported an overrepresentation of male gatekeepers, and also that over 90% came from North America and Europe, whilst only just over 5% from Asia and under 2% from South America, Oceania, and Africa. And also there's a bit of data here about who are acknowledged to be experts. So here in this other study by McDowell and colleagues, also from 2019, they surveyed nearly 500 early career researchers. So this is anyone who's defined as not a sort of primary reviewer, principal investigator, sorry. And about half the respondents responded that they had never done independent peer review. However, they had experience, a lot of them had experience reviewing as co-reviewers. So something that they've contributed ideas to a peer review, but they've not been invited to review it. However, they were very rarely recognized for this work, and the authors define this co-reviewing without recognition as ghostwriting. So we can deduce here that someone who's called an expert, who has expertise to lend to the peer review process, and has enough knowledge to peer review, may be part of a homogeneous group, and there may also be some people who are being missing or not represented that are actually contributing ideas to peer review reports. And just to note here as well, and this is from 2017, so potentially this math has changed somewhat, but I think we can guess probably not too much. That when gatekeepers of global research systems do not reflect the diversity of the researchers whose work they're overseeing, significant biases can emerge. Valuable knowledge can be overlooked or dismissed. It can skew the body of knowledge and limit the scope of what's recognized as legitimate science, can stifle innovation, reduce inclusivity, and also hinder advancement of knowledge. This is a map that was created by Skolcon Lab, and it is about data from publications from countries that was sourced in Scopus. So that's where this the data is from there. And I'd also like to highlight as well that unprofessional reviews also cause harm to researchers. So this is another impact of having undiverse, untrained, and overworked peer reviewers, is that authors can receive unprofessional or even harmful reviews. So here we have a survey of international participants in STEM fields. And this study investigated the pervasiveness and author perceptions of long-term implications of receiving unprofessional comments. And some of the comments that people reported receiving included things like this. This paper is simply manure. What the authors have done is an insult to science. Or even more personal attacks, such as the author's status as a trans person has distorted his view of sex beyond the biological reality. Or the author's last name sounds Spanish. I didn't read your manuscript because I'm sure it's full of bad English. So these are quite shocking and extreme examples, but they are real examples that were reported in this study. So I think what we can deduce from this is that unprofessional reviews are a reality of the peer review system, and it also underscores the importance of this bias training. Another aspect to mention in this study is that the authors investigated the pervasiveness of the long-term implications of receiving these unprofessional comments and found that members of underrepresented groups also had greater impact of receiving these comments on their own perceptions of their career, their productivity, their aptitude. So it really goes to underscore the importance of not only providing useful feedback, but not harmful feedback. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing now at PREreview. So our mission is to bring more equity and transparency to scholarly peer review, particularly by supporting and empowering communities of researchers and those at their early stages of their career and who have been historically excluded to review preprints in a process that's rewarding to them. And we do that via three main pillars of our work. So the first is an open platform where anyone with an ORCID identifier can share open constructive feedback to preprints and also be recognized for their contributions if they choose to be so. Each review gets a DOI. As I said, login is done via ORCID, but people can choose to sign with their public name, which I should know overwhelmingly people do choose to use their public name, or they can also use a pseudonym if they feel, for whatever reason, less confident. If they choose their public name, this can also be linked to their ORCID profile to hopefully build a bit more recognition for this work. We also do our peer review training programs to train researchers and experts on constructive, socially conscious peer review practices. Again, here mostly it's focused on early career researchers, but it's tailored for different groups of people. And we do community engagement, which is what a lot of my work focuses around, engaging with experts around the world via collaborative live reviews, where we bring people together to review preprints online, PREreview clubs, which are also a collaborative way for people to get together to learn more about reviewing. And we also have a train the trainer champions program, which is in its second year. So just to mention here a little bit about our open reviews training and resources. We do these training workshops regularly with partners, some of them are on the slide there on the right. They sometimes are 2-hour workshops that are standalone or more in-depth 6-hour workshops over a series of days. And at the end of those, we often accumulate with a live review where we put into practice all of the skills that I've gained in a review that we'll get together and review a preprint. There is a focus on issues of recognizing personal bias and what you bring to the peer review process, and also how peer review sits within the wider systems of oppression that we work within the world. All the resources are openly available online. They're on Zenodo, they're CC by 4.0. People can take them, adapt them however they like for their own training purposes. And as I mentioned, we also have a champions training program where we train people to then go on and be able to provide this training to others within their community. And these are just some examples of how people have then taken our resources to run their own training programs, so to scale it. And Anna, as I said, will be talking to you a little bit more about how HHMI have done that. I've only got a couple more slides, I promise. This is a little bit about showing you how a collaborative live review would work. So this is done as a final part of the training workshops, or also as a standalone event that we do in collaboration with journals. And we bring people together online for a 90-minute call. We'll read a preprint in advance. We come together, we facilitate the call, we take people through a series of guided questions about providing the feedback. Authors are also invited and have overwhelmingly told us that there's been a really positive experience, even when they've been quite apprehensive about getting this live feedback in advance. And then within 2 weeks, we compile all of the notes into the final review, publish it on PREreview.org with a DOI, and anyone that helps us to compile those notes and write the final review has the option to be named as a review author and get recognition for that work. And that's just kind of a little bit more how that looks like and how we're also trying to build this greater visibility and recognition of the important work that peer reviewers do, which has often gone invisible, but obviously it is very vital work that people do. So you can add that to your ORCID profile, and we also have digital badges and things, certificates and things like that for people who take part in our training workshops. And that's all from me. I'm about happy to answer questions.
By the way, thank you so much. I have a timer on my watch. I don't like after listening to my presentations, I have a lot of interesting questions to ask. So I'm going to start it to make sure we have enough time for those questions. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna. I work in scientific strategy at the Howard Human Medical Institute. I come to open science through the lens of the recognition and reward system. So before HHMI, I was the founding program director of DORA. So I like to think of peer review through the lens of, how do scientists get credit? Today, I'm going to tell you about a training program that my colleague Michelle Avasar-Whiting and I developed last year. And now I'm taking on and leading and growing and expanding our pilot. So I'll kind of go through what it is, but since there is a short time, I'm mainly going to point out what are the features of this program that I think are interesting,
and why I think they're interesting and important. So first off, it's called Transparent and Accountable Peer Review. We're calling it TAP. It is for graduate students and postdocs. Right now, the pilot is for graduate students and postdocs that are affiliated with HHMI and HHMI labs, or as Hannah or Gillian calls, and teaching them how to write collegial and constructive public peer review reports on preprints. So the first thing that I want to point out is that preprints are a defining feature of the training. And there are several reasons for that. The first is that there's no barrier to participate in preprint peer review. You can do this without an invitation from an editor. The second is near and dear to my heart from a research assessment perspective, is that preprints don't have an impact factor. So when you're learning how to peer review an article, you're learning how to comment on the science, the importance of the science, the strength of the evidence outside of the confines of the journal system. And mentors are involved in the training too. And so through this avenue of using preprints, you're not only introducing the concept to graduate students and postdocs, but if their mentors are not familiar, you're able to bring them into this conversation too, through training and development for their students, which they're invested in. And the last, of course, is that there are benefits for preprint authors and readers. And we, I like the phrase that, transparency can promote trust. So how can we use preprint review to give authors and readers better context about the work? Okay, so this is a training, but the participants are generating scholarly outputs. Two main ones. They write a practice peer review report on a preprint. This is an output of a workshop that we do that's centered on what is peer review, who is peer review for, how do you read a paper, how do you construct the report, how do you post it, how do you get credit for it. And within that workshop, there's a practice session where participants, like pre-review, Vanessa was saying, read the preprint before the session, and then talk through with the facilitator. We typically invite an HHMI investigator or other lab head, how to construct this review report, what goes into the main summary, what is a major point, what is a minor point. Because this is a practice report, it might not be within their area of scientific expertise, it's not published, but it is something that my team reviews, and we give personalized feedback to every participant. And a lot of that feedback is making sure that the comments to authors are collegial, making sure that the comments are actionable, making sure that major points affect the conclusions of the paper and they're categorized in the right places. The public report is done also with support from the TAP team, but what we can't provide is scientific oversight of the report, and so that is why their research mentors are involved in the training. So their research mentors help, like in the sense that they read the preprint together with their mentor, they discuss it. The participant writes the report, the mentor provides feedback on it. They send it to us, we check it, and then it gets posted on PREreview. So those are the two main outputs. So it's posted on PREreview. It also gets preserved as a Zenodo record through PREreview. It's visible on bioRxiv, and it's syndicated to Society. And I think, because this is a training program, it underscores really for us why it's important to have the mentors involved. So this is kind of walking you through the process that I just mentioned, that the mentor's oversight is critical, and it really is a collaboration with the participant to write the peer review report. We also provide reports. So I mentioned the workshop that we do in month 1. They have 3 months to write that public peer review report. like, it's a long time. But we all know that graduate students and research mentors have different schedules. So this is really giving them enough space to be able to, figure out what works for their schedule and their mentor's schedule to produce the peer review report. But during that time, there are regular check-ins with the TAP team and the other participants. So we have our first check-in for this cohort coming up in a couple of weeks. And that's really going to focus on, like, have you selected a preprint yet? What helped you select your preprint? Are there barriers? So you're getting support through the cohort as well. And then in sort of the month 4, when I talk about HHMI, we check the reports. We also share it with preprint authors before it gets posted publicly. And I want to walk through those because I think those points are important. So we created a rubric that we use to check the peer review reports, and that drives the feedback that we give our participants. We ask for, revisions if they're needed. Sometimes there are about like 30% from last year's cohort. And then we share the report anonymously with the preprint authors. This is important because we want our peer review reports to be of value to the preprint authors. So we send them an email letting them know that their work was selected as part of our training program. It was reviewed by a graduate student, with their mentor. It's going to be posted on peer review in like 24 to 48 hours. We wanted to make you aware, and we invite a public reply if you would like, because pre-review allows for commenting on their reports. And then I think this is an important option, and Vanessa mentioned it as well, is that when you post a report to pre-review, you get to decide how you would like to post it. So what we found from our last cohort is about 45% of the reports were signed with a pseudonym. And I think another about half signed with their mentors. So we give them options, like you can sign the report with your mentor, you can sign with a pseudonym, but it's entirely up to you how you want to sign. And then the last feature I think that's important for the training is that it's really the participant feedback that improves TAP. So we go through our optimization and planning phase. We work with More Brains. So we conduct sort of an initial survey of participants. We do the training. There's a wrap-up survey that goes to both participants and mentors. What worked well, what didn't, what was not as useful to know, what do you wish you had learned? And that's done with and in collaboration with More Brains. And that sort of really informs our process for that next year. So in 2024 was our very first pilot. There were 16 people involved. This year, how we're doing it is we're offering it twice, but once was as an in-person workshop with a smaller cohort of 16 people. And then a virtual workshop that will have 60 participants. And we're hoping, of course, to grow and expand even more in 2026. And with that, I just want to acknowledge I am here presenting, but there are tons of people who input into this program. And I just recently was able to hire Darian as an Open Science Fellow who will help me really sort of shape and grow and scale. So thank you everyone for your attention, and I look forward now to the future discussion.